Thank you very much all for coming. My name is Nav Kirti. I'm your host. I will invite Hwei.
Wow. Well, good evening, everyone. First of all, I didn't expect to be so formal. I didn't expect that I'm going to give a presentation, but more of probably setting the scene, and then we can go into a good dialogue and conversation. But thank you for the invite, Nev. I think I'll sit, yeah, if it's okay with all of you.
This is the
okay. So maybe a bit of a background with DAC. I mean, is that it is the Design Education Advisory Committee that was put together, appointed by the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and this is hosted by Design Singapore Council. The idea here is that to look into design education for Singapore into the future, right? And there are two parts to what this committee was supposed to do, right? One is to look into how we can infuse design as a life skill into everybody, right? And the other is about how do we literally lift the bar for education, of quality for design education. It's not my full-time job. I have a day job. Right? I'm a independent consultant since leaving Philips, and it has taken us 4 years on this journey of design education advisory. And I think through it, we learned a lot as a committee. I learned a lot personally, and that's where it got my interest quite deeply into design education, or education at large, or learning for that matter. So what I'm going to do today is to share 3 conceptual thoughts, which probably you're familiar with, right? Or it may be slightly different from how you think about learning or design as an education or as a creative problem-solving capability. And I thought that perhaps with that background, and then Nev articulates his idea of Metaskills, which I'm very curious about as well, and that's why I agreed to sort of come and say, okay, yeah, I know you're going to have a talk on Metaskills. I thought I would just come in and just be an ignorant guest and share and learn more, but also with all of you as well. So I like to take it in that spirit that it's more of us having a dialogue rather than me sharing something which could, like I said, right, may not be totally new, but the context of how this came about could be interesting for us to think about into the future. So this is, in a way, a collective of thoughts that has been shaped by the committee over the 4 years, because when we were carrying out the committee's work, we had to go in depth into understanding what goes on with the education system, what goes on with the industry, right? And also a lot of projection into what the future would be, right? Because literally we're solving a demand and supply issue, if I were to put it so, in a binary way, where the schools are providing and they are building the capabilities to meet the demands of the industry, right? And you can see how the relationship can be transactional at times, but that's exactly where we felt that it is about time we rethink that relationship. So I would probably share a lot of this in the context of me as a practitioner for many, many years. So I will feel quite safe, right, to put out some bold thoughts from the lens of the industry back to everybody, which I assume are a mix of practitioners, educators, right, and a lot of diverse capabilities here. So if I may just start the ball rolling to this evening's conversation, the first thing I want to share, and probably some of you have seen it, because I've mooted this in the Design Education Summit, I think it was this year. I lost track of time actually. Last year, okay.
Last year, 2023.
Right. But I managed the time so badly, I didn't get to finish all the slides, so I'm taking this opportunity to finish the slides here. So the first one is what I call the paradox of learning and solving. Yeah. Why learning and solving, right? Maybe I stand up. Sorry. Well, the learning part, I think we all know, right? You know, when we start learning when you're young, we go to school, and then we probably, like a typical Singaporean kid, we would spend, I don't know what, 10, 14, 20 years of our life studying, and then after that, we go to work, right? We get a job, right? That kind of relationship. And here I use the definition of solving because I think we all agree that a large part of our lives is about solving problems, isn't it? Right? Problems that you get at work, or problems of with families, problems that you get with personal issues, finance problems, so and so forth. Right? Every day you're solving a problem, big or small, right? Whether it's defined or undefined. So when you're young, you start off with a very divergent or very big box, right? The space of your mind is actually very large. Right? Your space of your mind is very large. You start by playing, right, as a kid. You explore. And then you get yourself into primary school or kindergarten, primary school, right? And you start to learn tools. You pick up tools. You pick up concepts. You pick up rules, right? And then you go to further education, right, or higher education. And that mode of learning continues, that you are pumped with more and more frameworks, thinking, right, without us really consciously knowing. And then you get a job. You get into the company, right? More rules, so and so forth, right? You get the picture, right? So you get KPIs when you go into a large company, into organizations, right? You start to work with governance, right? And then your own experience builds up, but it can also sometimes work against you as well. So in a way, that learning part of it is actually converging. So I think this is contrary to remarks that I hear also a lot about saying, hey, well, you know what, kids today is actually smarter than the kids from previous generation. Well, I'm not sure whether that's true or not, because I think we tend to mix up information with intellect. So kids today are given a lot more opportunity to pack in a lot of information, right? So at a very young age, they know a lot of things, but that doesn't equate to intellect. So you got to see this in a very simplified, schematic manner, but the idea here is that the concept here is that as you grow older, your learning capability actually converges, right? Either through factors in your surrounding or you self-impose them. Right? But what goes on in the opposite direction, it's that in terms of the problems that you need to solve actually gets larger and more. Right? The scale actually gets larger. You know, literally when you grow up as an adult, you take on responsibility, you start a family or whatever, you run an organization, you get an organization, you run a team, right? You're given more heavy responsibility to take decisions, so and so forth. The scale, the complexity, the fuzziness especially increases, as well as the number of stakeholders that you got to deal with. So this is what we refer to as the paradox of learning and solving, where we say that, you know, how do you sort of address this, right? You address this hopefully by keeping the triangle, you know, as divergent as possible and not let it close down too quickly. Yeah. So conceptually, this is what we were discussing in a way on a very broad level within the committee, because this is what we see as critical, right? What is facing the kids of today as they go from the general education into the IHLs, right? Into the higher learning institutions. So this is the first sort of piece of concept that I would like to leave you with, right? To really sort of frame and be the basis of tonight's conversation, right? And when Nev, I think eventually when you talk about the meta-skill part of it, this is that broader picture that we have to really think about, right? How do we sort of address this paradox? Is there a sweet spot? I don't know, right? Is there a moment where you said, yes, you allow that box to close in, or is there a moment where you said that you can continue to keep the triangle, right, into a square, you know, that learning part of it, right? I don't know, right? This is something that we have been conversing within the committee. Yeah. Okay. Feel free to share your thoughts and reflect, right, as I go through. The second part of this is something to do with the jobs situation. Yeah. And this has been also an important part of the conversation on the committee because part of the committee, half of the committee is made up of leaders from the IHLs, and the other part of the committee are made up from practitioners representing the different disciplines in the industry. Because that part of the committee really, it's the one which sort of provides the representation from the industry's demand, right? What is needed in the industry, so that then the conversation with the schools can happen in a very meaningful manner, right? And maybe just to track a bit is that the reason I agreed to be the chair of this committee is a bit of a selfish motivation, because for the longest time I was running design teams in large organizations. So I've been at the, let's say, the demand end or the receiving end of student graduates, right? So instead of, I told myself, instead of just sitting there in my office and lamenting and complaining the quality of students, right? I think it's better that if I can do something upstream and work with the IHLs to do it. So that's a bit of that motivation. And that has also become the thinking with the committee, right? That now the committee with this mix of IHL leaders, but also industry practitioners, and over the course of 4 years, we know each other very well, right? There's a lot of empathy between the two groups. So it's not a transactional relationship anymore where the industry demands from the schools, right? Say, I need students of this specification. See, it's almost like buying something, you know, please produce them in 4 years. And then the IHL scramble, right, to squeeze in everything, right? And hopefully immediately upon graduation, right, the graduates get delivered to the office, open up, and then say, okay, I think I can use it or I cannot use it, right? It's impossible, right? I think there should be a greater, a closer relationship, or there must be more skin in the game from the industry to the school as well, because you can't pack both hard and soft skills within a very short time of 4 years. And that's where the empathy over the 4 years within this committee has created so much understanding that we begin to see the opportunity simply for the IHLs together with the industry to work together on a relational level rather than on a transactional level. So that's something that I really want to share. And the discussion about jobs, right, which we know has been a key focus to the Institute of Higher Learning's directions and mandate, right? It's absolutely sometimes fanatic, right? You know, and we are chasing every detail of what is the trend of the industry. And I'm not sure whether that's sustainable or not, to be very honest, right? So we took a broader picture, we took a broader view to how we see jobs. And this is that second part which I want to share with all of you, is that the jobs today basically, or the jobs in the past, right, basically holds this relationship where I think we will agree that jobs is a composition, right? It is defined by the problems that the organizations need to solve, right? Can we agree to the definition, right? In a very broad way, right? You could be an accountant in an organization. You could be someone in the assembly line of a factory, right? Those jobs, because you need to do a certain action, right? And you could put that under as task or problem, and you compose them to give a job description, right? And that's where you have a role definition, and followed by then, okay, these are the capabilities that you need, right? You need to be invoicing, or you need to do invoicing. So what capabilities do you need to do the invoicing every month, for example? And supported by probably a set of skills. So in that order, that relationship. And it's a very conventional, traditional order of how we see the definition of jobs, right? Which starts from the task and problem definition, going to the role, right? And what kind of capabilities and skills supports that. Very traditional. But I think what we are all seeing today is that that definition may not hold water anymore, or is starting to change. Not that all the jobs in the world are changing, right? There's still a large part of the economy, or even in countries, which still hold this. But that's where it gets interesting, that instead of chasing after what are the trends in the specific trends of the domains in the industry, right, we can start to look at how the jobs will transform, right? How jobs manifest itself in terms of its reference from what I've just shared previously, meaning the future of jobs is probably going to look slightly different. First of all is that you can see the relationship of the jobs in context of the industrial age, where we are still in, I would still say, right, that parts of our industry of the country are still in the industrial age. There are some parts which has already gone into the digital age. Let's recognize that, right? Not every part of Singapore's economy is in the digital age. And for that matter, we could then scale this thinking to the rest of the world as well. Some countries, some economy are way entrenched in the industry and in the industrial age. And of course, some economy in other countries have also thrived, right, and gone into the digital age. What is important to look at is that in the industrial age, jobs are actually quite well defined and are quite specific. So you actually know, right? It's not unlike Singapore in the past 50 years, right? When you know what to build in the economy, you know what jobs is required. You need to build schools, you need to build bridges, you need to build more facilities. That's why you need engineers. That's why you need doctors for hospital. That's why you need bricklayers and things like that, right? Very clear. But what confronts us in the digital age is that it starts to get undefined and very fuzzy, right? You don't really know jobs what jobs are coming. Maybe just a show of hands, how many of us are working in mid to large size organization here? Right?
No.
Quite a good representation, right? Is that I think a lot of organizations actually don't really know what jobs they need in the next 6 to 12 months. Yeah. I come from a large organization, and this is not a criticism, but it's just a phenomenon, right? Is that it's because of the pressure of performance. First of all, is that people start to do more than one job. So how many of you hold more than one role in the organization? Right? 2, 3 titles put together, right? I think it is a situation whereby there's so much pressure from organizations to perform, and when constraints on the resources, that every organization is asked to do the same or more with less. Yeah. And what it creates in the situation, it is that you start to see a blending of roles, right? And I don't know whether you notice or not, right? If you look at job descriptions today on LinkedIn, right, it's beautifully written. It's written in such a way that, as if the organization knows what they want, right? But actually it's rather fuzzy. And I think they deliberately kept it fuzzy, and I've been guilty of that before as well, because, right, with one headcount that you fight so hard for in the organization, right, you want to make sure that that headcount can traverse between roles. So you keep it a bit fluid in the description, right? It's a bit like horoscope, right? Writing horoscope. You can interpret it in any way. Okay, I'm poking fun at it, but actually there's a lot of realism to that, because it's also due to the fact that as organizations respond to the transformation, right, a lot of organizations actually are still figuring out what are the kind of roles that they need. So I think that's the situation that we are facing with, and within the committee we have a lot of those discussions, especially from the practitioners as well. And we got to admit that sometimes the industry do not know what we need. And when we do not know what we need and we send the information to the IHLs, it's going to be disastrous. Because the IHL is going to respond directly to that, right? Which means that then there should be a better conversation between these two entities. But back to this would be that in the situation where we are moving towards the digital age, it starts to have an implication on this relationship that we just talked about, right? That the traditional definition of job stems from one which is about the task definition into a role, capability, and skills. What we feel is that probably it's going to reverse the relationship, where you can't really define a role anymore, right, in this new age. But what you could be identifying is what are the skills, what are the set of skills and capabilities that would compose in an individual that allows the individual as part of a larger team, right, that you could literally mix and match to tackle any problems that your company will face. So it's no longer the focus on a job or role description, right? And in fact, this discussion about job comes up very, very prominently in AI conversations right now, right? So there's a lot of discussion in the development of AI about how AI may take away jobs. There is a question right now, it's like a fundamental re-questioning about what is the definition of jobs anyway. And it alludes very much to this piece of conceptual thinking that we are discussing right now. So back to this would be that potentially what's going to happen in this future state, it is that probably it is more important to focus on skills and capabilities and not on the role definition itself. It's no longer about roles and responsibility. And each of us are always looking at roles and responsibility because that's safe, right? That's easy to understand, right? You apply for a job, right? Anybody applying for a job, getting into it, say, tell me what I need to do, right? Okay, these are your roles and responsibility, and you just sort of deliver according to the R&R, right? But I'm afraid that, that may no longer happen. And I think this requires a fundamental rewiring of the mind from the organization, but also as individual as well, right? And this has an implication on the learning part of it, right? So this is that second piece of the conceptual thinking that we talked about a lot, right, in the committee, which I'd like to share with all of you, because we will see this shifting to the other side, right? And also how organizations has to reorganize themselves, has to rewire themselves to look at the harnessing of skills and capabilities in this context. And perhaps just to share, right, in the time that I was with the company, I was running a very small, compact team, and this is actually out of circumstance rather than design, to be very honest, is that I had only 12 designers. So instead of defining each designer to a role, I decided to actually just focus on what are their capabilities. So I was very deliberate in bringing T-shaped people, and I think we're all familiar with T-shape. I didn't think that would work, but actually it did, because when you have a compact team and you have a lot of problems to solve, right, a lot of work given, I can't afford to have every individual having a specific role. Not easy to convince people to join us. And they say, you don't have a specific role. I say, what do you mean? But I'm a service designer. Yes, I know, but I'm going to look at your capabilities. I'm going to deconstruct you and look at your capabilities. And you got to shout about your capabilities, and you got to identify and recognize within yourself what are your capabilities, so that then when there's a project, you can say, hey, Hwei, I have this, I think I can participate. So that's what I've been encouraging in that team. In a way, like I said, it was our circumstance. Because I have a compact team, I have to organize it in that way, but eventually it did respond, it seems to respond well to the constraints that we have, right? So, so this is that second piece of conceptual thinking I would like to share, right, for this evening. And then the last, probably the most difficult for me to articulate, but I'll give it a shot anyway. Yeah, it's good that the wine helps. Okay. I'm going to make an attempt on this because this was one big piece that I did not manage to share at the Design Education Summit, right? I know that creativity has been talked about a lot, and the reason that I boil it down to creativity is because where design education is concerned, I was pushing very hard with the committee, right, to say that, well, design is actually creative problem solving. Because everybody is talking about design as a profession rather than as a capability. And if you were to boil it down to creativity, it actually cuts across many, many disciplines, right? If you're talking about technology, if you're talking about, every aspect of it requires creativity. So I think it's more interesting to talk about it at its most fundamental. And let me shape the context of this slide here, right? Is that having the the privilege to run many different sizes of design team in the last organization that I was with, and I see some ex-colleagues here as well, right? We have done a lot in terms of putting formal frameworks of how do we assess designers, right? You won't believe the details that we go into. It's a bit like Singapore skills framework, right? It's like, you know, that very comprehensive breaking down, right? We did the same, right, at Philips Design. I still remember going through it. So we have this big matrix map Excel, right, where you go into junior designer, senior designer, director, all the way up, and then we define everything about them, you know, what kind of traits that they must demonstrate, so that then when we rate them, we can refer back to that Excel grid and chart, and there's no dispute between all the managers, you know. Whilst it's helpful, it's very mechanical, right? And it sort of takes everything down to a very strict order, right? Which is not useful sometimes because some of those traits that you talked about can be very abstract, right? So that's one aspect of it. The other is that after many years, I start to think about that besides using that framework, which I felt it was very cumbersome, and I didn't fully believe in it, so Leonard, don't tell our ex-colleagues that after that, right? But I have to follow because it's right. But I really think about that. It starts to dawn upon me that, you know, if I look at all the better designers or the top performers of the design team that I have the privilege of managing, right, over the years, I was thinking, you know, to sort of list down what are the traits of these people, right? And I have names right now very clearly, right, in my mind about, and I can, and if we relate, these are the kind of traits that they have demonstrated, right? But I'm not referring to their professional qualities as a designer, if you know what I mean. So I'm not talking about how well they design a product, you know, not the kind of professional quality. I'm referring to something else, and this is the part which I'm going to try to articulate to you. It's what I call, with the best of my language, right, is what I call the enabling behavioral traits. Meaning that these are the kind of traits that you observe in individual, right, that would support, that would provide that condition for this individual, right, to be creative, right, that they would sort of give hints of this individual being creative. And this individual need not to be a designer, it could be any profession. Yeah. Or for that matter, it could be your children, you know. I mean, when you see your children's behavior, right, if they demonstrate such kind of enabling conditions, behavioral traits, right, they could well be somebody that eventually be demonstrating the actual core capability of being creative. So I'm not referring to things like curiosity, perseverance, right, imagination. I think that we all know. It is something a bit more peripheral. Yeah. I'm not going to go through everything, but these are that sort of 7 that I think I can boil down to. I can't go further. All right. The first one is actually resourcefulness. So many times, right, if I recall with my team members, those individuals who are most, that's why what I define as most creative are the ones which has most resource in their mind. I'm not sure whether I'm sure you have actually done this with your team, some of your team members. If you get them to do something, right? Hey, can you go and find something out for me? You get a few typical reactions, right? The first one would be, where do I find it? Hey, boss, where do I find it? Right? The second would be that, okay, but then, you know, you will go into the usual areas of, if you give them a more different task, right? This second one would probably say, they'll come back, yeah, I tried, but I couldn't find it. The third type would be, yes, next moment, you get wow, it's like, you managed to find it, you know, you managed to, where did you find it? Right? I'm sure you come across individuals like that, right? And I think this is due to the fact that the last individual has a lot of things back in the mind, you know? And I think this is, again, back to the point about that it's no use packing a lot of information, but if you don't recall it fast enough, you don't recall it, right, in the context of what is required or in the right order. So resourcefulness is one of those traits that I see a lot in those very good designers that has come through the teams, right? So that's one of them, right? I won't go through the critical thinking part of it. Taking initiative, definitely. Again, that remark about if you ask for a whiteboard marker, right? The guy who has the initiative will also give you the eraser as well, right? But I'm sure you come across individuals that you ask for something, they only give you that something. Then you got to ask 3 times, So it's about taking initiative, right? It is about understanding the context. It's about anticipating, right? This is another set of behavioral traits that I think it's very important, right? That will support that whole creative behavior. Interest stamina, it's what I define as the stamina to hold a particular interest in a particular topic or subject. Yeah. I won't define that as passion, right? Because passion is very emotional. But this is about the ability, right? That someone has that interest, that stamina to be interested in a particular area. I think that is also one of the basis or one of the fundamentals of creativity. Yeah. And perhaps the last one, hardworking, it may seem a bit out of relation, right, with creativity. What's got creativity to do with hard work? But I think hard work is so underrated these days, right? We often hear work hard, but also work smart as well, right? I think that's a very political corporate talk, right? But I think we should really celebrate and encourage hard work, because as we all know, creativity is not that 3 a.m. idea that you suddenly wake up in the evening, and that the idea is really through hard work, right? It is about constantly sort of thinking about it, packing yourself with information, right? With and also being observant and sensitive and so on and so forth. So I won't go into too much detail of it. I think we can unpack a bit more in the dialogue later. But this is that third piece of that conceptual thinking I want to share with you. Right? Like I said, it's a bit different from the typical conversation about creativity, but I think to boil it down into its fundamentals can be very useful for us when we talk about how do we help, right, the kids to learn, or maybe for ourselves as well. Right? And it's not always necessary about that when it comes to learning, it must be in a formalized way. Right? And I also think that there are also other informal ways of learning as well, which again, right, is not talked a lot within the context, especially in organizations, right? I think I'll leave you with this here, and I'll hand over to Nev. Thank you.